This program covers scheduled maintenance for the G3WD Series E hydraulic excavator. The program is also outlined in the G3WD Operator's Manual provided with the machine. You may want to refer to pages 40 through 43 of the manual while you watch the videotape. It is also a good idea to use this checklist as you perform the maintenance checks. The first area we'll cover is the boom. Located at the working end of the boom is the tool linkage pin, the cylinder pivot pin, the adapter pivot pin, and the connecting link pivot pin. Greasing these pins every day greatly improves the life of the pins and bushings. If you're working in a wet or sandy condition, it is a good idea to grease them twice each day. Grease is a lubricant as well as a purging agent. Old grease containing abrasive contaminants is pushed out by the new grease. The tool link pin, adapter pivot pin, and connecting link pin each have 2 grease points, one in each end of the pin. The tool cylinder pivot pin has 4 grease points, 2 at the rod end and 2 more at the barrel end. The extension cylinder support bushing may require some positioning so the grease fitting is accessible through a boom hole or portal. The front of the main boom has 5 rollers that require daily lubrication. The grease fittings are located on each of the horizontal and vertical rollers. The top roller is easily accessible while it is in the boom rack, or when the boom is tilted like this. The telescoping boom has 3 rollers that support the rear of the boom. These fittings are accessible only through the portals shown here. The specially shaped portal gives full access to the rollers. The cradle is the housing at the back of the boom and has several areas requiring daily maintenance. In particular, the 2 cradle pivot pins should be greased. Also, the tilt cylinder's rod end and barrel end. This cylinder tilts the boom on pivot pins located at the front and the rear of the cradle underneath the boom. Each of these pins has a grease point. The hoist cylinder has a grease fitting for pins at the rod end and barrel end. The barrel end of the hoist cylinder is accessible from underneath the excavator upper structure through an access port. The swing bearing has 2 grease fittings located directly underneath the cradle. These fittings grease the inner ball bearings that go into the race 90 degrees apart. The grease is distributed when the upper structure swings. It is a good idea to check the radiator coolant level each day to avoid downtime. Use a 50-50 mixture of antifreeze and water and fill the radiator to about 1 inch above the core. While you're in the engine compartment, check the crankcase oil level prior to starting the engine. Add oil if needed. The air cleaner indicator should be checked while the engine is running full throttle. If red is showing in the sight gauge, it is an indication the engine is working too hard pulling air through the filter. Always replace the element when it's dirty. It is best to fill the fuel tank with diesel at the end of the shift. This reduces the risk of developing condensation in the fuel tank. The transmission fluid should be checked each day while the engine is running at idle speed and the transmission is in neutral. The dipstick is accessible through the panel in the main deck of the upper structure. The hydraulic filter indicator should be checked with the machine in remote mode and the engine running full throttle. For a reliable reading, the oil must be hot. For this reason, performing this check right before lunch is a good idea. Replace the hydraulic filter when the indicator shows that it is dirty. Check the hydraulic oil level in the reservoir each morning while the oil is still cold and the boom is still racked. Under this condition, you should see oil in the center sight gauge. Hydraulic oil increases in volume as it gets hot, so it should be visible in the top gauge by the end of the day. This concludes the daily maintenance section. At the end of the first 20 hours of operation, the crankcase oil and filter should be replaced. On a weekly basis, all tires should be checked for correct pressures. Proper pressure prolongs the life of the tire and aids machine stability. Follow the specific requirements for the tires on your machine. The air cleaner vacuator should be checked for damage and obstructions. Tap the side of the vacuator to knock loose any debris. The front spring hanger pin should be lubricated each week. The brake system air dryer should be checked for the following items. No solid particles should be coming from the air dryer at any time. Second, the air dryer should give a short blast when the compressor kicks in or out. Finally, no air should escape while the compressor is running. Escaping air is an indication of a dirty cartridge. Check the air tanks each week by opening the valves on the underside of the tank. There should not be any moisture in the tank. If there is, check the air dryer system. The steering system reservoir located in the engine compartment should be checked and refilled as needed. Automatic transmission fluid is used to replenish the system. The swing pinion and ring gear should be lubricated each week with open gear lube. At the end of the first 30 days, check the torque of all items indicated in the torque table and diagrams on page 42 and 43 of the operator's manual. Let's review the items in that table. On the upper structure, the boom in-out cylinder rod, the boom in-out cylinder ball joint, the boom retainer brackets, the boom rollers, the boom stop blocks, the swing motor, the swing pinion gear, and the swing transmission. On the carrier, the front axle spring U-bolts and wheel lug nuts should be checked. Be certain you consult the correct specifications depending on whether you have a 4x4 or 4x2 carrier. On the rear axle, the wheel lug nuts, axle brackets, and axle U-bolts should be checked for proper torque. Other carrier checks include the propel motor, the swing bearing, the ring gear, and the steering gear. The swing brake and swing transmission should be checked for proper levels. Replenish the swing brake with hydraulic fluid and the swing transmission with a multi-purpose lubricant as required. At the front of the machine, check the oil cooler fins and clean as required. The engine drive belt should be checked for damage and proper tension and possible damage. Adjust or replace belt as required. The crankcase oil filter should be replaced with each oil change at intervals of 150 operating hours. Therefore, this is generally a monthly maintenance item. The battery electrolyte level should be checked at this time also. Replenish electrolyte with distilled water as needed. There are 6 universal joints on the G3WD 4x4 and 3 on the 4x2 model excavator, which should be greased every month. Close to the universal joints are the grease fittings for the drive shaft splines. There are 3 on a G3WD 4x4, and there is 1 on a 4x2 model. The slack adjusters are located on the axles. The 4x4 model utilizes 2 slack adjusters on the rear axle only. The 4x2 model utilizes 4 slack adjusters on the axle, 1 at each wheel. The differential should be checked and filled with gear oil as required. If you have a 4x4, the front differential should be included in this check. The drag link pivot has 2 grease fittings. There is 1 at the front and 1 at the rear of the drag link. The tie rod pivots, located at each end of the tie rod arm, require lubrication on a monthly basis. The steering column has 3 universal joints in the linkage that require greasing. 1 universal joint is accessible in the operator's cab. The other 2 are accessible underneath the cab at the front of the machine. The secondary fuel filter should be checked each month. Drain any water if necessary. The hydraulic reservoir breather should be cleaned and replaced if necessary. And finally, the front drive splines, accessible through the front drive hubs, require greasing once a month. The swing transmission should be drained at the plug located at the base. Fill the swing transmission with a multi-purpose lubricant. This is also the time to check the breather on the swing transmission. Clean and replace if necessary. Check the transmission breather located near the dipstick. Clean and replace if necessary. On the underside of the transmission, check, clean, and replace the transmission sunscreen if needed. This is also the time to drain the transmission. Refill with hydraulic transmission fluid. Funk Manufacturing recommends C3 additive. Located near the transmission on the side frame is the transmission filter. It should be changed each time the transmission oil is changed. Next to the transmission filter is the primary fuel filter. Replace the element semi-annually. The secondary fuel filter, located on the engine, should be replaced also. The brake camshaft should be lubricated sparingly in this area. The differential should be drained and refilled to level with a multi-purpose lubricant. The Rockwell specification is 85W140GL5 lube. If your G3WD is used off-highway, this check should be performed every 2 months. The differential breather should be cleaned and replaced at this time also. The hydraulic oil should be analyzed every 6 months, and the hydraulic filters should be changed every 6 months or 500 hours with ISO grade 46 hydraulic fluid, unless filter indicator shows a need to change them earlier. Be sure to dump the pressure in the hydraulic reservoir at the pressure relief before opening the tank. On an annual basis, drain and refill the cooling system with a mixture of antifreeze and water. Factory fill is a 50-50 mixture, but this may need to be adjusted for local weather conditions. The air dryer cartridge should be replaced every year. And finally, unless the hydraulic system is analyzed semi-annually, the system must be drained, flushed, and replenished each year.